Time travel. The cause of many issues in storytelling and the solution to very few. I went on record recently in saying that I don't think any time travel story has ever been seamless, and I stand by that. I believe that if you dig hard enough, you can find some discrepancy or issue with every time travel story in existence. And in particular, I made a point to examine the time travel in God of War 2, a time travel story that, despite being filled with holes akin to Swiss cheese, never really got that much coverage because the time travel in God of War 2 is something we've all just come to accept. Aside from being poorly explained to begin with, you have inconsistent temporal rules that affect people differently on a case-by-case basis, at least one temporal clone of Kratos kicking around somewhere, a timeline simultaneously changed and not changed, and various explanations that don't hold up to scrutiny, like the idea that once the Fates were dead, it basically upended the rules of time travel, but in that case, why was Athena still dead when Kratos came back to the present? Occam's razor, simplest answer is usually true. It's just one of those things that wasn't thought out very well, and I'm assuming it's one of those things that they either didn't put too much thought into, or were hoping that you never put too much thought into. It's like this bit from Austin Powers.
I suggest you don't worry about this sort of thing and just enjoy yourself. That goes for you all, too. Yes.
But something slid across my desk at some point, the prospect of simply eliminating the time travel from the story altogether. And that got me thinking about how they could do that, and I think it's a fun writing exercise to be able to take all the pieces of a story, take it apart, and reassemble it, keeping all the major points while removing the time travel altogether. So let's have a little fun and do that. So let's take a look at the major plot beats. Game opens up, Kratos is earning the ire of the rest of the gods, and so Zeus is forced to trick him into writing his own death warrant, putting all his magic into the blade before being killed. Gaia then instructs you to change history. You're not powerful enough to go straight to the Temple of the Fates, so you have to go earn the Rage of the Titans. Then you have to get to the Island of Creation and gradually make your way through the various trials and tribulations of the island to get to the Temple of the Fates while also getting various powers to help you along the way. Then you get to the temple, kill the Fates, go back in time to try and ultimately fail to kill Zeus, then go back in time again, this time with the Blade of Olympus, all the way back to the Titan War and bring the Titans to the present where all-out war is declared against Olympus. I've already gone over all the ways the plot collapses in on itself if you think about it too much, so let's start with the point of view that we're eliminating time travel altogether and time travel is functionally impossible. So in that case, what do the Fates actually control in this case? Well, duh. Fate. They essentially have the power to manipulate reality around you to lead you down a certain path as they see fit. That means they were able to manipulate circumstances in order to end Kratos. You know how I said the Colossus of Rhodes falling on Kratos seemed way too convenient? Well, there you go. They manipulated the threads of fate to have the statue fall perfectly on Kratos, which would lead to his ultimate demise. That was their doing. But here's the question, if the Fates are able to manipulate reality around you, wouldn't it be impossible to fight them? Couldn't they just have a meteor come down and smash Kratos the moment he revived? Well, here's a possible solution to that. The more powerful you are, the less power the Fates have over you. And by this point, Kratos had lost all his power, and so the immunity he had from the Fates was then stripped from him, and from that, they could then manipulate reality around him in order to be rid of him. However, it's only once he's dead that the Titans reveal themselves as Kratos' new ally. Despite being non-corporeal beings, the Titans still have some level of power and influence even in death. You can establish that since both the gods and the Titans were so powerful, neither of them could be influenced by fate, so the gods' victory was simply down to them having the bigger stick. This might also explain why Zeus knew to dig the hole. He can't see the future himself, but he's allied with the Fates, and they knew what was going to happen if things went down a certain path. Which might even in a weird way be in line with Greek mythology and how gods would always send heroes to do their bidding instead of directly dealing with their problems themselves. In this case, they send heroes because the Fates can stack the deck in favor of the hero, but not necessarily a god. Both a blessing and a curse. So Kratos had the deck stacked in his favor during the journey, but once he became as powerful as a god, it was all simply down to Kratos as well as a conveniently placed sword. But how do you work past the idea that the deck can easily be stacked against him now? Well, since Kratos now has an axe to grind against the gods, the Titans ally with him and infuse him with what little power they have left. Not only reviving him, but also partially shielding him from the Fates' influence. So they can partially dictate what happens to him, but they can't force fate on him the way they were able to just a moment before. But I would establish it to where the power the Titans were giving him is limited and fading, so he needs to kill the Fates before his time runs out, the power fades, the Fates are able to dictate his fate once more, and the Titan's last best chance at salvation dies forever. Still with me? So this brings us to the same point. He would still have to kill the Fates, but purely for his own well-being and not for the reasons of needing to use their power to go back in time, because like I said, that's impossible. So at that point, you would then have the same reasons and the same methods of going to the Temple of the Fates and killing the Fates, destroying the temple and destroying their influence over all mortal life. Therefore, there would be nothing stopping you from getting your revenge purely off the back of simply being angry enough and powerful enough to do it. But where does the Blade of Olympus as well as the Titans fit into this? Well, I'm glad you asked, hypothetical viewer, because without time travel, you would need a means to bring the Titans back in order to stomp on Olympus. Well, we've now established multiple times that you can bring people back from the dead, so instead of bringing the Titans back from the past, death should be the thing they're freed from. Kratos doesn't take that much power to bring back from the dead because at first it was the gods doing it and then it was the Titans doing it, and since he's a mortal soul, you can easily establish that mortals are easy to bring back because their souls are tiny insignificant things compared to godly souls. However, to bring back the Titans you would need an exponential amount of power. Well, what item in the series has been established to contain an absolute buttfuck ton of power? Well, the Blade of Olympus, obviously. Zeus took the blade with him after killing Kratos and killing the entire Spartan army, and presumably at this point it's still infused with all of Kratos' power as well as the power it has at a base level. So at this point, the thing is not only powerful enough to kill any one of the gods, but it also has enough power to revive the Titans. The question is though, where would the blade be? Because you would want to have it in a secure location so that Kratos couldn't simply walk up to it and grab it, but you would also want to contrive a reason for Zeus not to keep it on him. Keep in mind as well, we don't want to necessarily create a version of this game that's wildly bigger and more grandiose, because you have to keep in mind that we would still be working with the same constraints of time and budget. So presumably, once we get through the Island of Creation and kill the Fates, it can't be too long before we get to the point in which we find the Blade of Olympus. So perhaps instead of having a mirror in the temple act as a portal to the past, we can instead have it simply be a mirror through which we can go anywhere in the world. A teleporter, essentially. Because you can kind of see that. Obviously, since the Fates are controlling the fate of every single mortal on Earth, or at least Greece, they would want to monitor the world in a more direct fashion, and as such, having a means to quickly traverse the world as they see fit would probably be a good idea. And this could theoretically be the only means that Kratos could get to the Blade of Olympus. Because presumably, the only more secure place to keep the sword other than on Zeus at all times would be a Pandora's Temple on crack sort of arrangement. Someplace so secure that no mortal could ever hope to traverse its confinements. Maybe even have a barrier on the outside that disintegrates any mortal who tries to pass through. Something that using instant teleportation, one could simply bypass. And from there, you can do one of two things. Either you could have some sort of major trial within the temple or a lockup or whatever it is that the sword resides in so you can finish off the game with a fun series of challenges before the final boss, or you could just teleport Kratos straight into the heart of the place in which the sword is being kept and skip all the trials, assuming the developers were running out of time and budget by that point. And from there, you don't really need to change all that much. You find the place where the sword is being locked up and you're met by Zeus. He can then reach the same conclusion. The only way you could have gotten into the temple as a mortal would be if the Fates had turned, only to reveal that they're dead.
The Sisters of Fate have aided you. Unexpected.
The Sisters are dead.
Then you have a similar boss fight. If they're in a more confined place, you might not be able to do the giant Zeus thing, but then again, since the cat's out of the bag and Kratos is exactly where Zeus doesn't want him to be, Zeus could probably just destroy the temple, and at that point, it's sitting on a perch at the top of the mountain from which he can do the giant Zeus thing. The only issue I think with the final boss in that case would be the fact that it's remarkably similar to the final boss in God of War 3. At least in the first part of the fight, where you're fighting near Pandora's box and are trying to subdue Zeus long enough to decide whether or not you're going to open it or leave it be. Then again, I think it's hard to make a final boss in two games not be similar when in both cases you're fighting the same person. I think as long as you implement the changes to where Zeus himself destroys the temple and allows for a similar fight to the fight that already took place in God of War 2, you're probably in a good spot as far as differentiating the fights as much as they already are. Then obviously, without needing to go back in time to create any gaping plot holes, you end up pretty much right back where the game ended already, with Zeus at your mercy and Athena sacrificing herself to prevent him from dying. Then from there, how do we get to the point of the Titans being brought back? Well, Kratos now has the sword with all the power, so now all he needs to do is go to a specific place. And I say the specific place that you would need to go to is the burial ground of all the dead Titans. Once again, a place where no mortal could ever hope to survive, a place where even the gods don't dare venture. The absolute depths of Tartarus. But conveniently, the Temple of the Fates is falling apart and Kratos has enough time to use their instant teleportation to make one more jump, and goes directly there. Directly to the burial ground of the Titans, and with the echoes of Gaia in his mind, uses the power of the sword to bring them all back. This would also explain why certain Titans were permitted to exist in the present, because they never actually died in the Titan War, they were just subjugated in various ways. And that right there is how we get directly to where we already were at the end of the actual God of War 2 that already exists, with Kratos and the Titans storming Mount Olympus for one epic final fight that takes about 12 hours. Cue the end begins. And if you ask me, that's how they basically could have done the exact same thing with God of War 2 without needing a hint of time travel. Of course, this isn't airtight, and there's probably some other things I could have implemented in order to make things better, and of course we did skip over a lot of it, but that's mostly because a lot of it would be unchanged. The fight with Perseus, the fight with the barbarian king, that long drawn out sequence of events to open up the temple, all things that wouldn't need to be changed because the actual flaws of the story only present themselves at the beginning and at the end. The rest of the game is perfectly fine the way it is. Now, it's worth mentioning that this shouldn't be taken too seriously as an actual means to fix the story, because the only reason this can exist is with the benefit of hindsight. You see this a lot online, with people saying, oh, I would have done X, Y, and Z if I was in the writer's room. And it's easy to say that, but realistically, no you wouldn't, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's a lot easier to look at the reasons why bits and pieces of a story didn't work once the entire work is finished, rather than being able to start from scratch. It's easier to critique a painting when it's finished, rather than paint an entirely new canvas by yourself. I see this a lot in, like, wrestling discourse, for example, where some people see a poorly done booking decision and say, oh, I would have done it like this. I doubt that, because most people aren't even creative enough to come up with the version that made TV, let alone the fixed version that you're claiming you would have done. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is just mental masturbation, just talking about things that are kind of fun to talk about, but couldn't actually ever be implemented. I'm able to come up with these conclusions and talk about these things with the benefit of hindsight, and even though I have done some screenwriting in the past, I doubt that I'm creative enough to come up with this without also having a finished product put in front of me. At least not without the collaboration with other creative minds, and that's ultimately what screenwriting is. It's a collaborative effort. And I guess that's kind of what I'm doing here, is I'm kind of collaborating with Cory Barlog and the like either way. Just not directly. If you have any other suggestions, let me hear it. I'd like to know what the community thinks of this sort of idea and how else this game could have worked without implementing time travel. Within reason, of course. But that's it from me, so if you like this video and want to support the channel, you can leave a like, subscribe, and hit the notification icon so you're always up to date on what I'm doing. I already asked you to comment, so I won't bother doing that again. And if you want to support the channel in a more direct fashion, you can pledge to my Patreon for unique perks and rewards such as early access, Discord benefits, and exclusive content along with these fine folks right here. And an extra special thanks to Dick Kickham, Ga004, Hydra Overlord, FarmCat84, Raph, Ranger X, Sphinx, Weird Webster, and Will Stokes for going above and beyond. Also, I recorded this video in the middle of a rainstorm, so if you can hear that, I do apologize. I'll do my best to try and remove the sound effects. Elsewise than that, I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Stay crispy, my friends.